Revenge Diaries with I.M.
They laughed when I was fired, like it was the punchline to a cruel joke. But the sound of that laughter still burns in my memory, not because it hurt me, but because it became the spark that ignited my revenge. My name is Adrian Cole. For nearly 7 years, I had been the senior project manager at Veyron Dynamics, a fast-growing tech firm that I had helped build from the ground up. Every late night, every successful client pitch, every crisis averted carried my fingerprints. I wasn't just an employee. I was one of the engines keeping the company alive. But that didn't matter to Marcus Hale, the company's CEO. Marcus wasn't just my boss. He used to be my mentor, the man who said I reminded him of himself when he was younger, hungry, sharp, ambitious. For a time I believed that. I worked twice as hard because I thought we were building something together. I thought loyalty mattered. Then, one Friday afternoon, in a boardroom filled with polished smiles and expensive suits, Marcus handed me my termination letter. He didn't even look ashamed. He slid the paper across the table like he was dealing a card, while the other executives, people who had once cheered my victories, smirked and chuckled. "No hard feelings, Adrian," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "We just think the company needs fresh blood." The room broke into laughter. Not nervous laughter, not uncomfortable. It was deliberate, mocking, designed to humiliate. As if 7 years of sacrifice could be erased with a joke. I remember gripping the letter so hard that my knuckles turned white. My pulse roared in my ears. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but all I could do was stare at Marcus. His eyes met mine, cold, detached, calculating. That's when I understood. This wasn't a business decision. It was betrayal. The worst part? I had trusted him. I had defended him when others whispered about his shady deals, his obsession with control. I thought I mattered to him, that I was part of his vision. But I was just another pawn he could discard when it suited him. I walked out of that office with my dignity in shreds, their laughter chasing me down the hall like a haunting echo. On the surface, I looked defeated, broken, disposable. But deep inside, something had shifted. Because while they thought they had cut me out for good, none of them knew the truth. I had been quietly preparing something of my own. Something that would one day bring me back to that same boardroom. Not as their employee, but as their investor. And though I smiled politely as I left, a part of me couldn't shake the suspicion that Marcus hadn't fired me just for fresh blood. There was more to it. Something darker, hidden beneath his smirk. The laughter was just the beginning. Looking back, the signs were there long before that humiliating day in the boardroom. I just chose to ignore them, because when you believe in someone, you give them the benefit of the doubt. That was my first mistake. Marcus Hale wasn't always cold and cruel. In the early years, he treated me like a protege, pulling me aside after meetings to praise my ideas, telling others I was the future of Veyron Dynamics. But somewhere along the line, the tone shifted. I didn't notice it at first, it was subtle. A delayed reply to an urgent email. A client pitch where he cut me off and took credit for my research. A meeting where my suggestions were brushed aside, only to be repeated later by someone else he favored. At the time, I told myself it was stress. Marcus was CEO, pressure came with the title. But then the favoritism began. A younger executive named Dylan caught Marcus's eye. Dylan was charismatic but shallow. He could sell ice in the Arctic, but when it came to execution, he couldn't deliver. Still, Marcus gave him opportunities one had worked years to earn. Dylan was suddenly the voice of innovation. Despite leaning on me to clean up his messes behind closed doors. I'll never forget one late night in the office. Dylan had botched a major client proposal. He begged me to fix it before morning. I stayed until 3 a.m. rewriting slides, crunching numbers, restructuring the deal. When Marcus saw the revised proposal, he congratulated Dylan in front of the entire team. "Brilliant work," he said. Dylan grinned, said nothing, and Marcus looked right past me, as though I didn't exist. That was the first time I felt the sting. Not just of being overlooked, but of being erased. Then came the secret calls. Marcus started excusing himself mid-meeting, phone pressed tightly to his ear, voice low and sharp. Sometimes he'd leave the building entirely, only to return with an odd smile. When I asked about it, he'd wave me off. "Nothing that concerns you, Adrian. Focus on the projects." But it did concern me. I could see the strain in the company's finances. Budgets were tighter, approvals slower. Vendors complained of late payments. I flagged the issues to Marcus, but he dismissed them, insisting everything was fine. "Don't worry about the numbers," he said. "We're scaling faster than ever." Yet the numbers told a different story. Cash flow was slipping. Expenses were ballooning. Deals looked good on paper but never translated to profit. I started to feel like I was standing on a sinking ship, and the captain was smiling while plugging holes with tape. The lies only grew from there. One afternoon, I overheard Marcus telling a board member that I was burned out and struggling to keep up. My chest tightened as I listened from just outside his office door. Burned out? Struggling? I was the one holding entire projects together while Dylan stumbled his way to applause. I confronted Marcus later, tried to keep my voice steady. "You told the board I'm burned out. Is that really how you see me?" He smiled too quickly. "You misheard. You're doing great, Adrian. Don't be so sensitive." But I knew what I'd heard. The emotional strain began to seep into every part of my life. Sleepless nights. Constant anxiety. Wondering why the man I once admired had turned against me. My girlfriend noticed the change. "You're somewhere else even when you're home," she told me. She was right. I was replaying conversations, questioning my worth, doubting everything. And yet, despite the favoritism, the secrecy, the lies, I stayed. Because I believed I was indispensable. That they couldn't replace me. That loyalty would eventually be rewarded. But deep inside, a seed of doubt had already taken root. The day Marcus fired me didn't come out of nowhere. It was the climax of a betrayal that had been unfolding for months, maybe years. I just hadn't wanted to see it. And when the laughter echoed in that boardroom, it wasn't just the sound of my downfall. It was the sound of every ignored red flag crashing down at once. The day everything came crashing down started like any other. Coffee in hand, inbox overflowing, another round of deadlines. But beneath the routine, something felt off. A quiet unease hummed in the office air. People avoided my eyes, whispered when I walked past. It was as if they already knew something I didn't. By noon, Marcus called an urgent board meeting. I walked into the room with my binder of reports, ready to discuss the quarter's performance. Instead, I was met with tight smiles, folded arms, and a silence that made my stomach knot. Marcus stood at the head of the table, shoulders relaxed, confidence oozing. Beside him, Dylan smirked, a predator's grin that made my blood boil. "Adrian," Marcus began smoothly, "we've been reviewing company strategy. And while we appreciate your years of service, we feel it's time for a new direction. Effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties." I blinked, my mind scrambling to process the words. Relieved of my duties? Just like that? "Excuse me." My voice cracked with disbelief. "I've carried this company through crises. Every major deal, every client we've retained. My work made it possible. And now you're throwing me out." Dylan leaned back in his chair, smugness radiating. "Don't take it personally. Business is about evolution, and frankly, you've plateaued." Laughter rippled around the table, sharp and cruel. But Marcus wasn't done. "Truth is, Adrian," he said, sliding a folder across the table, "we've been preparing for this for months. Dylan has already been appointed as senior project manager. He'll be taking over your accounts, your clients, your team." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were copies of proposals I had drafted. Every detail, every calculation, every slide. My work, stripped of my name and rebranded under Dylan's. Sabotage. They had been stealing my efforts, grooming Dylan as my replacement while feeding the board lies about me being burned out and unfit. My chest tightened. Rage and disbelief collided in me, but beneath it all, there was heartbreak. Marcus, the man I once admired, the mentor I trusted, had orchestrated this. He had used me, squeezed every ounce of loyalty and effort from me, and then discarded me like trash. "You planned this," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Every late-night project, every client I saved, you fed it all to Dylan, so he could stand here in my place." Marcus didn't flinch. "You're talented, Adrian. But talent isn't enough. Loyalty to leadership matters more. You forgot who makes the decisions here." The room erupted in mocking chuckles, their laughter bouncing off the polished walls. It was the same laughter that would echo in my mind for weeks, tormenting me, fueling me. I wanted to shout, to slam my fists on the table, to tear the smugness off Dylan's face. But I stood frozen, staring at Marcus. His calm detachment cut deeper than any insult. To him I was nothing. Disposable. When I finally spoke, my words came out low and sharp. You'll regret this. Every single one of you. The laughter only grew louder, like a pack of wolves circling their prey. I walked out of that boardroom with my head high, but inside I was unraveling. Rage coursed through me, hot and consuming. Heartbreak hollowed me out. Disbelief pressed on my chest until I could barely breathe. How could a man I once saw as a mentor betray me so completely? How could people I worked alongside for years take pleasure in my humiliation? That night I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the city lights through the window. Their laughter echoed in my skull, mixing with my own doubts. Maybe I was a fool for trusting Marcus. Maybe I should have seen this coming. But as the hours dragged on, rage began to harden into something sharper. Something colder. If Marcus thought this was the end of me, he was wrong. Because I knew the company's weak points. I knew its debts, its hidden flaws, the skeletons Marcus kept locked away. And more importantly, I knew how to rebuild myself stronger, smarter, richer. They thought they had written my ending. But I was already drafting a new beginning. And one day soon, I would return to that boardroom, not as their employee, but as their investor. The first week after my firing was a blur of silence and anger. I woke up each morning with the same hollow ache in my chest, as if the laughter from that boardroom had followed me home and set up camp inside my head. First, I felt paralyzed. My routine had been stolen from me. No more morning rush, no buzzing phone, no urgent emails. Just long, empty days where the weight of betrayal pressed on my shoulders. The company I had given my best years to had tossed me aside without hesitation, and the people I once called colleagues had cheered as it happened. I replayed it constantly, Marcus's cold voice, Dylan's smug smirk, the board's mocking chuckles. The memory tore through me like glass, leaving me restless, sleepless, drained. For a time I wondered if they were right. Maybe I wasn't as valuable as I thought. Maybe I had plateaued. But then came the trigger. One evening I stopped at a local cafe. I needed air, noise, anything to drown out my thoughts. As I sipped a bitter coffee, I overheard a conversation at the next table. Two young entrepreneurs were discussing their startup. They spoke with fire in their voices, scribbling numbers and ideas on napkins, eyes shining with possibility. Something inside me stirred. I remembered myself at their age, hungry, driven, unstoppable. Before Marcus's praise turned to poison, before the lies and favoritism dulled my confidence, I had been just like them. I had dreamed of building something that mattered. I left the cafe with a question burning in my mind. Why am I letting their betrayal define me? That night I dug through old folders on my laptop, drafts of business plans, notes from late-night brainstorming sessions I never pursued. I found ideas I had shelved because Marcus told me to stay focused on company goals. I realized with painful clarity that I had built his dream while neglecting my own. And that's when it hit me. Marcus hadn't destroyed me. He had freed me. Freed me from blind loyalty, from being the workhorse behind someone else's empire. The humiliation I suffered wasn't an ending. It was the spark for something greater. The realization shook me. For the first time since that boardroom betrayal, the rage inside me didn't feel like poison. Felt like fuel. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, studying my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot, my face hollow from sleepless nights. But beneath the exhaustion, I saw something familiar, determination. The same fire that once carried me through impossible deadlines, impossible projects. No more self-pity, I whispered. No more waiting for validation. The words surprised me. They weren't just a mantra, they were a promise. I began to act on it immediately. I called old contacts, people I had helped win deals, clients I had saved from walking away. Many remembered me fondly, respected me more than I realized. Some even confessed they were frustrated with Veyron dynamics, hinting they'd follow me if I started something new. Piece by piece, the fog of betrayal cleared. In its place grew a vision, a plan. Not only would I rebuild, I would rise higher than Marcus ever imagined. But it wasn't just about success. It was about justice. Marcus had stolen my work, stripped me of my dignity, and weaponized loyalty against me. One day soon, I would face him again, not as the discarded employee he mocked, but as the man holding the financial strings. The thought of it made my chest tighten, not with fear, but with anticipation. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I would need capital, allies, strategy. I would have to outthink and outmaneuver the man who once taught me everything I knew. But the pain he caused had carved something new in me. Resilience sharper than steel. For the first time since my fall, I felt alive. The laughter that once haunted me no longer echoed as mockery. It pulsed like a drumbeat, a reminder of why I would fight. And when I returned to that boardroom, it wouldn't be as their victim. It would be as their investor. If the boardroom had been their stage, then the next act would be mine to direct. Quietly, precisely, without applause. After the turning point, my anger sharpened into a plan. Not wild theatrics, but carefully stacked moves that would pull the rug from under Marcus without ever looking like a tantrum. Revenge, I decided, would be surgical. Collect everything I owned. Not for nostalgia but for proof. I dug through my hard drives, email archives, version histories, timestamps, every late-night slide deck, every annotated contract. Where my name had been scrubbed, there were metadata traces, draft comments, old file names. I exported everything, cataloged it, and made redundant backups in 3 separate secure locations. If they'd stolen work, I would show where it began. Follow the money. Marcus's confident smile covered sloppy accounting and creative bookkeeping. Vendors who were suddenly preferred, and clients whose invoices bent in strange ways. Those were threads. I hired a forensic accountant through an old contact who owed me one favor. We traced late payments, shell vendors, and a pattern of expenses that didn't match reported growth. Some numbers hinted at more than incompetence. Possible kickbacks and shifted liabilities. Nothing public yet, just a map of weakness. Line up witnesses. People mattered more than files. I reached out to clients I'd saved, quietly explaining what I needed. An honest statement about who closed the deal, who handled negotiations, who the client actually trusted. Several were eager to help. They were tired of Veyron's recent promises and empty deliverables. I also spoke with team members who had been marginalized, engineers who'd stayed late because I asked, and ex-admin who remembered the original drafts. Their corroboration turned isolated files into a pattern. Build leverage. Public shaming would be messy and risky. I wanted legal and financial leverage before any public move. I found a small group of disgruntled investors and a couple of angel contacts who respected me. With their backing, I quietly acquired a modest but influential stake in the company through secondary shares. Not enough to take control, not yet, but enough to call for formal audits and to force votes when the time came. Set the trap. Marcus loved speed and spectacle. His ego made him predictable. So I created an opportunity he couldn't resist. A contrived big partnership that required urgent approval and a short due diligence window. I fed it through channels Marcus trusted, making the proposal look time-sensitive and lucrative. The bait was designed to trigger his worst habits: fast decisions, bypassing compliance, and personal approvals favoring his favored vendors. While Marcus strutted in public, announcing a bold quarter, hiring PR firms to polish the narrative, and praising Dylan as the new face of innovation, I waited. On the inside, the forensic report grew thicker. Client statements lined up with file metadata. My investor allies reviewed the irregularities. The trap was set to expose both the talent theft and the financial sleight of hand simultaneously. A package that would force the board to act or face regulatory scrutiny. Throughout it all, Marcus kept acting like the man in control. He posted optimistic updates on LinkedIn, smiled for lunches with board members, and bragged about the upcoming funding round. The more he performed, the more dangerous he became. A man who believed his narrative so fully that he'd make unguarded moves to protect it. That tension became my clock. A scheduled investor call, a looming board vote, the PR push for the funding announcement. Each became a deadline. I synchronized the release of my evidence with the moment when outside investors would be deciding if Marcus's Veyron was worth more than the whispers of mismanagement. I didn't want to destroy the company. I wanted to reclaim what was mine, and to make Marcus accountable for using loyalty as a weapon. My steps were methodical. Proof, witnesses, leverage, bait, and then exposure. No theatrics, just inevitability. On the night before the vote, I sat in my small, bare apartment with the forensic report open and client testimonies queued. The files glowed on the screen like landmines. My hands didn't shake so much as hum with a controlled energy. The plan was ready. The allies were committed. The trap looked irresistible. Outside, the city slept and Marcus slept too, confident and smug. Inside me, a different kind of sleep was impossible. Dawn would bring the first move, and by noon, one way or another, the truth would start to leak into a room where laughter had once ruled. The morning sunlight cut through the glass of the conference tower like a blade, painting the boardroom in sterile gold. Marcus arrived with the same practice swagger, pockets full of confident headlines and a PR team on speed dial. Dylan followed, haloed by camera phones and the eager whispers of those who'd ridden Marcus's wave. They expected a coronation, another perfunctory board vote, applause, then lunch. They had no idea the audience waiting in the room and outside the building. I walked in last, not as an intruder but as a shareholder with a presence and a plan. My stake wasn't monstrous, but it was enough to call a special meeting and bring witnesses. I sat at the oval table like a ghost of every hour I'd poured into that company. Steady, unhurried, calm. Marcus smiled that bright, practiced smile. "Adrian," he said. "Surprised to see you back." "No," I answered simply. The room quieted. Phones were stilled. The hum of confidence began to falter. I began with the document drop. Quiet, clinical, a stack of folders slid across the table, then another, then a screen that lit up with timestamps, metadata, email chains, and draft histories. The forensic accountant I'd hired spoke next, each sentence a scalpel. He narrated late payments rerouted to shell vendors, invoices duplicated and funneled through preferred suppliers tied to Marcus's outside interests. He tied Dylan's sudden successes to work that bore my fingerprints in version histories. The board shifted. Faces that had laughed now blanched. Then came the clients. One by one they took the floor, stoic, clear, and damning. They read contracts and recounted negotiations, naming the person who had actually closed the deals. Names matched emails and emails matched my drafts. The room felt like it had been drained of air. Marcus countered with charm and bluster, launching into rehearsed denials. He waved a prepared statement like a shield, tried to smear the evidence as out-of-context drafts. Dylan clutched at his own script, eyes darting for allies. But charm can't override metadata. Spin can't rewrite digital signatures. The PR team launched a preemptive story on social feeds, curated smiles and confident captions. I'd already anticipated that. At my signal, my allies leaked the forensic report to a journalist who had followed Veyron's dealings for years. Her headline hit the feeds in under 30 seconds. Veyron Dynamics. Evidence of internal fraud and talent theft surfaces. The feed exploded. The boardroom dissolved into chaos. Chairs scraped. Phones buzzed with questions. An external counsel, neutral and grave, suggested an immediate independent audit and suspension of Marcus pending investigation. Marcus's face lost color. He reached for control and found only fingers slipping through his grip. Dylan stood, voice small now, trying to defend himself. "You don't understand. I was following orders." But the words died. Team leads who once applauded him now avoided his gaze. A junior engineer produced a Dropbox with the original slide decks. The logo watermark, the comments in the margins, all pointed to a single truth. Dylan had been the mouthpiece. Adrian's work had been the engine. The climax arrived like a thunderclap. An emergency vote was called. My modest stake, combined with the investor group I'd stitched together, swung with the evidence. The motion to suspend Marcus passed with a heavy, decisive majority. Security escorted him to his office to retrieve personal items. He left with the hollow calm of a man whose kingdom had collapsed. Outside, cameras caught Marcus's attempt at a final spin, a statement about differences in governance. Inside, auditors began cataloging servers. Regulators were alerted. 2 of the shell vendors my accountant traced were frozen pending inquiry. Bank accounts were put on hold. Marcus's phone calls went unanswered. When the room cleared, it was quiet in a way that felt sacred. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window and watched the city move on as if nothing had happened. Dylan's future at Veyron evaporated. Offers from competitors were quietly rescinded. Marcus's public life was unspooling in real time. Investors pulling, reputations eroding, legal exposure looming. A young board member approached me, eyes wet and honest. "We thought you were gone," she said. "We were wrong. You were part of the problem," I replied. "But this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about making it right." My voice did not shake. It was not gloating. It was an iron promise. As I left the tower, the sun slanting low, I felt the laughter of that old boardroom finally meet its echo. Not mockery but consequence. The city hummed, indifferent and exacting. Karma in motion. Justice, executed with a ledger and a witness list. I'd come back as their investor. They'd laughed when I'd been fired. Now they watched as the man who once carried their company decided its fate. The applause this time came from neither Marcus nor Dylan. It came from the quiet certainty that I had reclaimed what was mine. Not with fury, but with precision. In the weeks that followed the boardroom showdown, Marcus Hale's empire unraveled with brutal speed. The audit confirmed what my evidence had hinted. Financial irregularities, favoritism in contracts, and a consistent pattern of deception. Regulators opened investigations, and investors who once toasted Marcus began quietly distancing themselves. News outlets splashed his name across front pages, not as a visionary CEO, but as a cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. Dylan, once the golden boy, disappeared almost overnight. The clients he had claimed as his own refused to return his calls. Recruiters who had promised him lucrative offers ghosted him, unwilling to gamble on a man whose success was now exposed as a borrowed costume. The last I heard, he was trying to freelance, his reputation scorched beyond repair. As for Veyron Dynamics, it limped forward under interim leadership. Some board members resigned, unwilling to face the consequences of their complicity. Others stayed, desperate to salvage what could be saved. But the laughter that once rang out so freely in that boardroom was gone, replaced by whispers. By fear. By regret. And me? I was no longer their discarded employee. I was no longer the man whose worth could be measured in someone else's approval. My modest investor group grew into something bigger. A network of entrepreneurs, clients, and innovators who trusted me because I had earned it the hard way. The irony was sharp. Marcus had fired me to silence me, to erase me. Instead, he gave me the space and the fire to become something more powerful than an employee. My own master. There were nights I sat in my new office, smaller than Veyron's skyscraper but mine, and thought about the journey, the humiliation, the rage, the exhaustion. All of it had nearly broken me. But in the breaking, I had found the steel inside myself. Justice didn't come with a single knockout blow. It came piece by piece. Every file recovered, every ally rallied, every truth revealed. Revenge wasn't just about seeing Marcus fall. It was about proving, to myself and to them, that the man they had mocked out of the building was the man they could never truly erase. And when I walked past Veyron's tower one last time, I looked up at those glass windows and remembered the sound of their laughter. Only this time, I wasn't haunted by it. I smiled, because I realized something. That laughter had been their last victory. My victory was everything that followed. Because in trying to bury me, they had planted the seed of the man who returned. Not as their servant, but as their equal, their rival, their reckoning. That is poetic justice. Now let me turn to you. Have you ever faced betrayal, from a boss, a friend, or someone you trusted, and felt that sting of being underestimated, humiliated, or cast aside? What did it teach you? Did it break you, or did it build you into something stronger? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Share them because you never know who might need to hear that they're not alone. And if this story struck a chord, if you felt that surge of justice in your chest when Marcus finally faced the consequences, then stick around. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of betrayal, resilience, and poetic justice. Because remember, high voltage, they laughed when I was fired, but in the end I came back as their investor.